Arrogant bikers laugh at a homeless man moments later. They're running for their lives. The roar of engines cut through the air as a group of leather-clad bikers pulled into the heart of the city, their motorcycles gleaming under the midday sun. Their gleaming black bikes, each one a masterpiece of chrome and steel, rumbled in unison like a pack of predators making their presence known. Their laughter echoed down the street as they revved their engines, each biker wearing an air of arrogance, their faces obscured by dark sunglasses and hardened expressions. They didn't care about the stares they attracted, nor the way the pedestrians stepped aside as they passed. They were untouchable, a brotherhood that ruled the streets in their own way. To them, the world was a place for domination, for flaunting their power and swagger. They lived for the thrill of the ride, the freedom of the open road, and the respect that came with their intimidating presence. At the corner of the street, near a small park bench, sat a figure who didn't seem to fit into this world. He was a homeless man, no more than a shadow of a person in a worn-out hoodie and ragged jeans. His face was rough, weathered by time and hardship, his skin blotched from years of exposure to the elements. A faded baseball cap sat crookedly on his head, and his hands, calloused and scarred, gripped the corner of a tattered blanket that he used as his bed. He had long since given up on caring about the world around him. The biker's loud laughter didn't faze him. He had learned to tune out the noise of life years ago. But today, something was different. The bikers slowed as they approached him, eyeing him with a mixture of disdain and amusement. "Hey, look at this," one of them called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "A real street rat. What's he doing here? Washed up? Huh." The others burst into laughter, their voices rough and brash. One biker leaned in closer, revving his engine just to get a reaction. "You lost, old man?" he sneered. The others laughed again, a sharp, cruel sound that reverberated through the street. The homeless man didn't respond. He just sat there, his head slightly bowed, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat. The bikers circled around him like wolves, their motorcycles casting long shadows over his tired form. Each biker took turns cracking jokes, pointing at him and laughing louder. The man's silence only seemed to encourage them, as though they were feeding off his perceived helplessness. "Look at him," another biker scoffed. "He's got nothing left. Might as well just fade into the pavement. No one's gonna notice." The mockery continued, each taunt more demeaning than the last. The homeless man's chest rose and fell with a deep breath, but he didn't look up. Not yet. He had heard it all before. Countless insults thrown his way, countless moments of ridicule. But something about today felt different. He could feel the weight of their laughter, the arrogance in their voices, and the venom in their words. The bikers finally pulled to a stop around him, forming a loose circle. They parked their bikes side by side, their boots crunching against the concrete as they dismounted. They all stood tall, towering over the man, their postures wide and open. They had no fear, no respect, only a need to humiliate. "You know, I thought we'd see something different today," one of the bikers said, squatting down to the man's level. His voice lowered, dripping with sarcasm. "A little more excitement, maybe. Something to make us feel alive." He ran his gloved hand along the edge of the homeless man's blanket, tossing it aside carelessly. "But you're just a waste of space." They all chuckled. One biker, a tall, broad man with a patched leather jacket, stepped forward and kicked the side of the man's foot lightly, as if daring him to retaliate. The man flinched but didn't move. His eyes remained cast downward, but his fingers twitched slightly, betraying the simmering anger beneath the surface. The group of bikers stood around him, all wearing smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They were predators, and this man was their prey. To them, he was nothing more than a target for their amusement. Another story to tell later at the bar. Another laugh at the expense of someone too weak to fight back. But as they laughed, something shifted in the air. The homeless man's posture straightened slightly, as though he were gathering the strength to rise. The bikers didn't notice yet. They were too caught up in their own arrogance, too sure of their control. As the bikers continued to jeer and taunt, the air began to feel heavy, charged. Something unspoken lingered between the group and the man, like the calm before a storm. They hadn't realized it yet, but they had just provoked something they couldn't yet understand. It was only a matter of time before the game changed. The bikers' laughter echoed like thunder on the street, their taunts growing bolder as the seconds passed. The man, still sitting on the ground, seemed like nothing more than a weak, broken shell of a person. So much so that the bikers began to feel increasingly comfortable in their role as the dominant force. They took turns stepping closer, pushing their boots into the dirt around him, laughing louder with each passing moment. One of them, the biker with the patched leather jacket, leaned in further, his face twisted with malicious humor. "You're a disgrace, old man," he said, spitting out the words as though they were poison. "You're a joke. What kind of a man lets himself get like this? Pathetic." The others exchanged grins, their gruff voices laced with glee. They looked down at the homeless man as if he were nothing more than a speck of dirt beneath their boots. To them, he wasn't a human being, just a nuisance, something to ridicule for a moment before moving on to the next thrill. But something changed in the air, something the bikers failed to notice. The homeless man's fingers, which had been curled slightly under his blanket, gripped the fabric tighter. The muscles in his jaw tightened, and his eyes, once shielded by his hat, began to glisten with an unspoken intensity. "You think you're tough?" the biker with the patched jacket asked, taking another step closer. "You think you can talk back? You're nothing. You're a nobody." He reached down and gave the man a sharp nudge with his boot, knocking the edge of the blanket aside. A chorus of laughter erupted from the group. The homeless man's lips parted slightly, his voice breaking the silence for the first time. "You don't know who I am." The words were quiet, almost inaudible, but they carried a weight that made the laughter falter. For a brief moment, the bikers exchanged uneasy glances. Had he spoken? Did he mean to say something? But the biker with the patched jacket wasn't finished. He reached down, grabbing the man's arm with a firm grip. "Who the hell do you think you're talking to? You think you're important? Look at you, this is all you've got. Nothing but dirt and broken dreams." The homeless man remained silent, but his body stiffened. A flicker of something deeper, something dangerous, flashed across his face. "I warned you," he muttered, barely above a whisper. But the warning was enough. The bikers, who had been pushing their limits, slowly backed off. There was something in the man's voice that made them hesitate, just for a moment. The biker with the patched jacket scoffed, standing up straighter. He gave a chuckle, his bravado returning. "Nice try, old man. You almost had me scared there." The others laughed again, their mockery returning with full force. They didn't understand. They thought he was bluffing, trying to regain some control. But something was amiss. A subtle shift had occurred, unnoticed by the bikers but felt in the air. "Get up," one of the other bikers growled, nudging the homeless man's foot with his boot. "Stand up. Let's see what you've got." The man's eyes flickered, and for the first time, his gaze met the biker's. There was a coldness in those eyes that made the biker pause for just a second. But it was enough to make the others chuckle again, dismissing the moment as nothing more than a fluke. And then, in a sudden, fluid motion, the homeless man stood up. It wasn't the slow, labored movement they expected. Instead, his body seemed to shift, almost as if he was shedding the years of weariness, the years of being nothing. There was an undeniable change in his posture. He stood tall, with a presence that sent a ripple of unease through the bikers. They hadn't expected it. The biker with the patched jacket smirked. "Oh, look at that. He's got some fight left in him." But the man didn't speak. He merely stood there, a quiet stillness hanging between him and the bikers. His gaze now held something far more powerful than the bikers had anticipated. A strength that was both quiet and intimidating, a power they hadn't seen in him before. For a moment, the street fell silent, save for the low hum of the motorcycles and the distant sounds of city life. The bikers, sensing something was off, glanced nervously at each other. Something was different. They weren't sure what it was yet, but they felt it. And then, just as quickly as the tension had built, it snapped. Without warning, The homeless man moved with surprising speed, his actions quick and deliberate. The bikers' laughter died in their throats as they saw him reach into his jacket. There was no time to react, no time to process what was happening. One biker reached for his jacket, trying to step forward, but before he could speak, the homeless man snapped into action. The bikers froze as a strange, eerie realization took hold. There was far more to this man than they had ever imagined. The atmosphere crackled with tension, the sounds of the city fading into the background as the bikers stood frozen. Their eyes locked on the homeless man. In the few seconds since he had made his move, something had shifted. The easy laughs, the taunts, the feeling of superiority. They all seemed distant now, fading like the wind. The bikers, once brimming with arrogance, were now acutely aware that they had crossed a line they should never have dared to cross. The homeless man, still standing tall, didn't make a move to continue the confrontation. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch, his piercing gaze scanning each of them one by one. It was almost as if he were weighing them, calculating something they couldn't fathom. The street seemed to grow smaller around them, the faint rustle of leaves and distant city noises now drowned out by the low, humbling presence of the man before them. One of the bikers, a younger man with shaggy hair and a cocky grin, stepped forward nervously. What's your problem, man?" His voice wavered slightly, a crack in the bravado he had been wearing moments before. "You really think we're scared of you?" The man didn't answer. His silence spoke volumes. "Come on," the younger biker pushed, trying to sound tough but faltering in the face of the man's unflinching stare. "You think you can take us all on? You're nothing." But as the words left his mouth, something within the man seemed to snap. Without warning, the homeless man moved like a coiled spring, quick, precise, and with a level of skill that was impossible for the bikers to predict. His body surged forward, not with the anger of a desperate man, but with the grace and power of someone who had once been something far more dangerous than they could ever understand. The young biker's eyes widened in disbelief as the homeless man grabbed his arm in a vice-like grip. The biker tried to pull away, but the man's hold was unyielding. He twisted the young biker's wrist, forcing him to his knees with a fluid motion. The other bikers, momentarily stunned by the suddenness of the attack, took a few steps back, their hands hovering near their pockets where they carried their weapons. "You don't know who you're dealing with?" the man muttered, his voice low and filled with a calm authority that shook the young biker to his core. The man's eyes, cold and unwavering, seemed to pierce through him as if he were nothing more than a nuisance. "You made the wrong choice." The young biker winced, his face contorting in pain, but the man didn't relent. He leaned in, the weight of his presence suffocating. "Your arrogance has blinded you. I'm not the one you should fear." He slowly released the biker, who scrambled to his feet, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. The other bikers stood silent now, no longer laughing, no longer mocking. A heavy silence hung in the air, each of them unsure of what to do next. They had expected a confrontation, a fight maybe, but not this. They had underestimated him, laughed at him, and now they were starting to realize their mistake. The man didn't move, his gaze sweeping over each of the bikers, one by one. And as he did, the bikers began to feel the weight of his stare, a look that seemed to strip away all the bravado they had built up over the years. They had been the predators in the streets, the ones who controlled the space, the ones who made others shrink in fear. But now, in the face of this man, they were the ones who felt small, the ones who felt hunted. The biker with the patched jacket, the leader of the group, cleared his throat and stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "What do you want from us?" His voice was shaky, betraying his attempt to sound calm. The homeless man's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. Only something darker, something that hinted at a knowledge far beyond what the bikers could imagine. "You're not the ones who get to decide that," he said simply, his voice steady. "You never were." The bikers stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. This wasn't the homeless man they had mocked. This wasn't the fragile, vulnerable person they had imagined him to be. In his eyes, they saw something else, something dangerous and unrelenting, something that made their skin crawl. The biker leader took a step back, his confidence crumbling with every passing second. We don't have time for this, he muttered, motioning for his gang to move. Let's get out of here now. But as they turned to leave, the homeless man spoke again, his voice cutting through the air with an almost predatory calmness. It's already too late. And just like that, the bikers froze once more, the unsettling feeling creeping in as they turned to face the man. Something had shifted, and they realized they weren't in control anymore. The game was no longer in their hands. The man's words hung in the air like a threat, calm, unhurried, but laden with an undeniable sense of finality. As the tension in the air thickened, the bikers realized that they had made a mistake they might never be able to undo. The air grew thick with unease as the bikers stood frozen, their eyes darting between each other. The confidence that had once fueled their cruel taunts now seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the palpable tension that surrounded them. The homeless man, no longer a powerless figure in the street, stood in front of them like a quiet storm, calm but dangerous. His words had struck them like a blow to the gut, and the bikers could feel the weight of the situation closing in on them. We don't need this, the biker leader finally muttered, his voice strained. Let's go. Now. But before anyone could move, the sound of tires screeching against asphalt shattered the stillness, followed by the unmistakable roar of engines. A chill ran down the spines of the bikers as the sound grew louder, closer. They had underestimated the man. They had laughed at him, mocked him, and pushed him too far. And now it seemed they were about to pay the price. The homeless man's lips curled into a faint smile, but this time it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what was coming. You can run, he said softly, his voice carrying across the street like a quiet threat. But it won't save you. The bikers exchanged glances, their faces paling as the sounds grew louder. It was as though the ground itself trembled beneath their feet, vibrating with a strange energy that they couldn't explain. Something was coming. Something was changing. The leader of the bikers turned toward his crew, his mind racing for answers. They had never been in a situation like this before. They had seen themselves as kings of the streets, untouchable, invincible. But now they realized they had made a grave mistake. And worse yet, they had no idea how to undo it. One of the younger bikers, who had been silent up until this point, spoke up in a voice filled with fear. What's happening? What's going on? Before anyone could answer, a figure appeared from the shadows. A tall, imposing presence that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The bikers' eyes widened in disbelief. A group of men, clad in dark clothing and leather jackets, rode in on sleek, black motorcycles. Their engines growled like wild beasts, their headlights cutting through the shadows. The leader of the gang on the motorcycles gave a slow, deliberate nod, as though he had been expecting this moment for a long time. The homeless man didn't flinch, his gaze steady as he watched the newcomers approach. The bikers were too shocked to react at first. They had assumed the streets were theirs, that they controlled the area. But now they saw that they were nothing more than pawns in a game they couldn't comprehend. Get on your bikes, the leader of the new gang barked. Now, the bikers hesitated for a split second, their minds struggling to process what was happening. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. They were supposed to be the ones in control. But now, as the seconds ticked by, they realized that the tables had been turned. Before they could react, the leader of the gang on the motorcycles revved his engine, the sound echoing through the street like a war cry. The bikers quickly scrambled to mount their own motorcycles, panic setting in. The homeless man, still standing in the same spot, didn't move an inch. His eyes were locked on the leader of the bikers as he silently observed the chaos unfolding before him. The bikers tried to get their engines started, but their hands were trembling. They fumbled with the keys, their breaths coming faster, their fear growing. It wasn't just the newcomers they feared, it was the realization that they had no control over the situation anymore. They had been reduced to mere prey, and in that moment, they could feel their power slipping away. Move! The leader of the gang shouted again, his voice sharp, commanding, or you won't have a chance to run. With that, The bikers tore off, their motorcycles roaring to life as they sped down the street in a frantic attempt to escape. But they were too slow, too panicked. The gang on the motorcycles followed them, staying just behind them, never letting up. The chase had begun, and the bikers' fear was palpable in the air, a tangible force that weighed heavily on their every move. The streets, once familiar and comfortable to the bikers, now felt like a maze. Every corner seemed to twist and turn, leading them deeper into unfamiliar territory. The once confident bikers now found themselves in the heart of the city, desperate to outrun the menacing presence that pursued them. But no matter how fast they rode, no matter how hard they pushed their bikes, the gang on the motorcycles stayed close behind them, their engines roaring in unison. The bikers' hearts pounded in their chests, their breaths ragged as they tried to escape. But there was no escape, not from the fear, not from the inevitable. And as the chase continued, one thing became clear to the bikers. They were being hunted. The bikers' hearts pounded in their chests as they tore through the city streets, their motorcycles growling beneath them like wild animals desperate for escape. Every turn, every corner felt like a new threat, a new attempt to outrun the terror that was hot on their heels. The once confident riders, accustomed to intimidating the streets and bending others to their will, were now nothing more than prey, their survival hanging on the thinnest of threads. The gang on the motorcycles was relentless, always staying just behind them. Their lights glinted like predatory eyes in the dark, and the sound of their engines never faltered. The bikers could hear their pursuers gaining ground, feel the pressure mounting with every second that passed. They were trapped. There was no place left to hide, no escape route they could take. "Turn," one of the bikers shouted, his voice ragged with fear. "Get off the main road." But there was no time. Every street they turned onto seemed to lead them deeper into unknown territory, into a maze of alleys and dead ends. The gang followed them with uncanny precision, their movements synchronized like a well-oiled machine, never giving the bikers a chance to breathe. One biker, his nerves fraying, swerved sharply down a narrow alley, hoping to lose their pursuers in the tight space. But it was no use. The gang followed without hesitation, their bikes expertly maneuvering through the alley like shadows in the night. Panic gripped the bikers now, their breath coming in shallow gasps. They could feel the heat of the pursuit closing in, the sense of dread rising like a wave threatening to crash over them. They had underestimated the homeless man, underestimated his connections, his power, and now they were paying the price. In the distance, the sound of sirens grew louder, but it wasn't the police. No, this was something else, something worse. The bikers' eyes widened as they turned another corner, their panic deepening. The alley opened up into a wide street, but before they could adjust, a fleet of black vehicles skidded into view. SUVs, unmarked cars, all blocking their path, their engines rumbling like a warning. The bikers skidded to a stop, their tires screeching against the asphalt. They were trapped. There was nowhere to go. From the lead SUV, a man stepped out, dressed in a black suit with a stern, emotionless expression. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the bikers as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience. Without a word, he signaled, and the men on motorcycles behind them cut off any potential escape routes. The leader of the bikers, still breathing heavily, tried to speak, his voice shaky. Who are you?" he asked, his tone barely above a whisper. "What do you want from us?" The man in the suit didn't respond at first. He merely took a step closer, his gaze never leaving the bikers. The sound of the motorcycles around them quieted as if the very air had thickened, pressing in on the riders with an almost suffocating weight. "You've made a mistake," the man in the suit said finally, his voice low and without emotion. "A very big mistake." The bikers exchanged nervous glances. They had thought they were the ones in control, that they could push around anyone they wanted. But now it was clear they had provoked something far greater than they could ever have imagined. They had become pawns in a game they couldn't win. "We're here to make sure you never make this mistake again," the man continued, his voice still calm, but now laced with an undeniable threat. "And the consequences of your actions will be dealt with swiftly." The bikers, who had once ruled the streets with their arrogance, now found themselves at the mercy of forces they didn't understand. The realization hit them like a ton of bricks. They had underestimated the homeless man, and now they were facing the repercussions of their cruelty. The man in the suit motioned to the gangs surrounding them. Without a word, the bikers were forced to dismount their bikes and kneel on the ground, their hands held behind their heads. The street was eerily silent now, save for the sound of the sirens growing louder, signaling the arrival of backup. They were surrounded. One of the younger bikers, his face pale and trembling, spoke up, his voice weak. "Please, we didn't know. We didn't know who he was." The man in the suit's eyes narrowed, his gaze cold. "That's your problem. You never bothered to find out." He turned to one of the men in the black SUVs and nodded. The man quickly approached the bikers, his hands moving swiftly. It was clear that whatever was about to happen, there would be no escape for the bikers. They had crossed a line, and now it was time to face the consequences. As the tension in the air reached its peak, the homeless man appeared from the shadows, his face expressionless. His presence seemed to command the entire scene. The bikers, still on their knees, looked up at him with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They had mocked him, ridiculed him, and now they saw who he truly was. "You should have learned to show respect," the homeless man said, his voice steady and unyielding. "But now it's too late." The bikers could only stare as the man in the suit gave the final order. They were no longer in control. The tables had turned completely, and as they were escorted away, their fate sealed, they realized the truth of the man's words. It was too late to run.